Hi, my name is Jennifer Jean.
Hi, I'm Wendy Drexler.
Hi, my name is Usman Hameedi.
I'm Kelly DuMar.
Hello, my name is Charles Coe.
Hello. My name is Febo.
And I am a poet. The Pacific. There were no road rails. I remember no road rails in the depth off the cliffs we motored along. I remember speed in a parched Chevy clunker that could not have sped, and bench seats and no buckles and bare thighs peeling off faux leather at every hairpin. Every elevated canyon mile was a feat, but a breath of less slickened air too, less cog and fume, a winding away from the wavering sea leg steam off blinding sidewalks, infinite sidewalks, and other shoeless kids kicking rusted palm leaves outside infinite apartment complexes, away from our corner of the valley of concrete corners, of no evidence of valley besides boulders stacked in the distance of every vista. The driver was a stranger, was my mother after my whole life had passed with stranger after stranger, was my mother after 7 years, and me at 7 years, with her driving that snuff-colored Nova from her blinding valley, not a valley, through Laurel, Topanga, Malibu canyons, all the way to some fantastic, to her beloved blue, eucalyptus choking local growth the whole trek. And the cooling air as we efforted west, and the jolt of a castle, the castle, in a distant crook of a range that hid the slate of the ocean, made me want to stop moving, but not stop here. I remember hoping to find hermit crabs the size of the mole on my right side chin, and if I tethered them to a stick, they'd line up by mass and trade shells, find homes that fit, and there'd be one left without, one torn out. A book said a scientist leaned into wet sand, watched a torn crab die in the beak of a gull. I can't remember if I saw that death or read it. I remember watching a wrong castle tucked into a wrong mountain notch on the chin of the sky like the hermit mole on my chin if my face were the sky. It's a beauty mark, my mother had said. Don't pick at it. I eyed that smoking stranger at the wheel and dug my nail in as the Pacific swelled into view that first time. So a few years ago, I was a judge for a poetry contest for high schoolers and middle schoolers, and it's called the Bow Seat Ocean Awareness Program. It was my first time reading high schooler poetry and considering it, but also it was my first encounter with a bulk of eco-poetry. And so I was reading about the ocean over and over and over because they get a lot of submissions from around the world. And I just started thinking about where I grew up, which was in Los Angeles, California. And we used to go to the beach all the time, as is depicted in the poem, The Pacific. I just couldn't shake the memories of my home, and I just had to start writing poems. And I began to write a whole series of Pacific poems, is what I call them. And they also talk about the ocean and reflect on how my growing up in poverty was very much affected by my encounters with nature, but specifically the nature that appears in the ocean side and the sea life there and even birds and things like that. And this poem was one of the first Pacific poems that came out. And it actually came out pretty quickly.
I'm going to read 2 short poems that I wrote during the height of the pandemic in 2020. How to make a no-sew coronavirus mask from a poem. 1. After you've read this poem, place it on your kitchen table. 2. From the top of the poem, fold down a flap of your fear. From the bottom, fold up a flap of hope. 3. Turn this poem over and smooth it tenderly with the side of your hand. You will no longer be able to read this poem. Trust it. 4. Feed an elastic hairband over each end of this poem the way you once gathered the strands of your daughter's ponytail. 5. Now fold in both ends of the poem until they overlap like waves on the bay. 6. Turn over the poem and plump the pleats. 7. Secure the elastic hair bands of this poem around the shells of your ears. 8. Wear this poem as if your life depended on it. This next poem is this is a sonnet, and it's called Pandemic. Some saw a raven with ruptured feathers. Some smelled the homeless millions pressed inside a drop of blood. Some felt dark planets tilting. One planet covered in octopi, their arms entwined with acid from a toxic lockbox. Another with the ghosts of dead tree frogs dancing on shag bark. Some heard the dreams of the unborn clinking cracked glasses. Some wept, clawing the horizon. No vacancy signs were visible, only in ice. Some thought they heard a saw blade snap, but others insisted it was only a man strangling on solar wind. Some swore they could hear him rasp, throat choked on buckshot, chanting a cantus firmus of forget-me-nots. The first one was at the beginning of the pandemic, the coronavirus, when we couldn't get face masks, we couldn't get surgical ones or medical masks, and there were lots of materials online for how to make a mask from a handkerchief, from a t-shirt, no sew. And this poem, unlike almost all the poems I write, started with an idea, an intention, which was to see if I could look at the instructions for making this no-sew coronavirus face mask, which I had been looking at, trying to make, and make it into a poem, or make a poem of it. And the other one came from a totally different impulse, which was a quick write or a free write off of some line that seemed to then lend itself to a kind of entry or portal into all the things that the coronavirus kind of represented in a kind of surreal way. And then after I had generated a lot of that language, I got the idea, probably inspired by Terence Hayes, who has amazing sonnets, to see if this could be a sonnet. It may have been close to 14 lines. And so I kind of crafted it, worked on it, and it lent itself pretty easily to the sonnet form.
I'm trying to understand who I am, so I ask the dictionary for advice. The only definition that seems to fit is erasure, noun, the removal of writing, recorded material, or all traces of something. My origins are spelled out in separate sets of ink, based on official documents, parents' birth, and my own Brooklyn hospital certificates. I am Pakistani American. I exist as a hyphenated coincidence. I am just paper, easily forged, faked, forgotten. When I say I'm Pakistani, I claim a land I know nothing about. My identity, just autumn leaves crushed inside a clenched fist. When I speak Urdu, my mother's native tongue, my words are crumpled documents falling from my lips. I sound like nothing of family roots, a forest built in heritage. Still, I try my best to bloom a language out of the soil my parents left behind. But most of the time, I sound like decayed wood. When I say I'm American, I claim a land they say I know nothing about. I speak English, salute the flag, sing the anthem, eat the hot dogs, cheer for the Yankees. They say, but where are you really from? They say, but that's what you look like. They say, it's the same thing. It's close enough. When I say I'm American, that is when I am definitely Indian, or Middle Eastern, or not what I say I am. My erasure is so effortless. My birth certificate is as thin as a green card, colored paper crushed into confetti, snowing at a Make America Great Again rally. All it took was a travel ban for me to be Muslim enough. I say Pakistani American, but it reads like a zip code to nowhere. All I've ever wanted was an address I could call my own, a home built out of the strongest oak, safe and secure, not just piles of leaves easily cast away in the wind. I am the only definition that seems to fit, erasure, the removal of all traces of my origins, separate sets of ink. I am a hyphenated coincidence, just paper, forged, faked, forgotten Pakistan, a land I know nothing about, my identity crushed. When I speak Urdu, my tongue, nothing of family roots, of heritage, still I try my best to bloom out of decayed wood. I'm American. I speak English, salute the flag, sing the anthem, but where are you really from? But that's what you look like. It's the same thing. It's close enough. I am not what I say I am. My erasure is so effortless. My birth certificate is a green card, crushed into Make America Great Again. Muslim Pakistani American reads like nowhere. All I've ever wanted was a home, safe and secure, not just cast away wind. I am forged, faked, forgotten, left behind decay. I speak, they say no. Erasure is effortless. My birth certificate reads like wind. Yeah, so this poem was a prompt, and I just wanted to try something different. So I'm exploring how form can be utilized in slam quite a bit. So this is an erasure poem, and I define erasure, but then the poem itself is an erasure poem, and just kind of progressing through it. So kind of blending the page and stage a little bit more. I'm definitely a fan of that, and I think it just makes poetry more accessible. So it's been really fun to actually play around with it, because you may have one version of it, and then you're like, oh wait, I can play around with this, and then it's been really fun to do it. So it's like a little puzzle. Because the first part of it I'm pretty happy with, because it's really rich and it's in like poetry prose, and it provides a lot of material for the second and the third part.
Kettled. The glacier that formed our kettle left the shore where I am barefoot now, 12,000 years ago. I can see 6 decades back the kettle stages of my life. Feet wet, whether you want to or not, 8 a.m., June morning chill. You creep up, soaked to your waist. Knees knock under cloud covers of sun, every hair on your shivery arms goosed. Remember names of Red Cross teens? Holly, when we are lucky, lets us up onto the dry dock, wiggle our bodies to warm up. Bubbles must be mastered. Nose, mouth, and chin skim into the green. Blow and boil the kettle from the pear in your chest. Next, learn to be dead. There's a trick for that. Sink your whole face flat. Let your arms wing out straight. Make your legs forget, but don't stiff up. Pretend you have no brain or bones. You'll float. Roll over now. Big sky is watching. You watch it back. This floats like a nap. Holly's hand slips under, presses up the just right spot low on your back. When her hand is gone, you're a raft of your own. There are seasons in between lessons, point ballerina toes, then practice scissors on the dock and dives, chin tucked, soles tipped to take off into a breaststroke, a valentine sent by your arms, or backstroke, bang your head into the dock. Butterfly you'll never be, but freestyle finds your arms ease. Pull the water to your hips, your neck swerves, head lifts, one ear goes deaf, one catches splash and birdsong as your nose rushes, lips part for air. You're buoyant everywhere. You pick one August day to defy flagged lanes and guards and sneak under the buoyed perimeter. Alone, you want to be whole-bodied, smoothed blue. Your legs, scalp, breast, and eyes reach the depth of this brisk center where the kettle contains what? Below your belly is a bottom you cannot fathom. Will you be seized by your ankle, wrenched under? Your shoulders hold, but your stomach roils, and you've swum so far you can't go back. You're almost panic. You believed you could, but now, alone in this flimsy suit, will you be sunk? Then you remember. Roll over. Holly's hand at being seen by sky. Your eyes open into a beam of August blinding. The hand is gone, and shore is near enough. Kettle is about Farm Pond in Sherburne, where I grew up and learned to swim. And I have a very close friend. I live near there, but I actually live on the river. But my friend lives on Farm Pond still, and she was hosting something there last summer. And she said, maybe you would like to read a poem for this event. And I said, yes, I guess I better write it. So I wrote the poem sort of as my tribute to Farm Pond and learning to swim, and looking back in my 60s at that early opportunity to be in the pond without even knowing how to navigate the water at all.
I'm going to share a poem called Communion, Spring 2020. Do you remember the days when we'd all meet at some favorite restaurant? Stepping in from the cold, breathing clouds of garlic, shrugging off coats for the welcoming hugs. We'd examine the menu with the care of archaeologists blowing dust off a newly discovered Sanskrit tablet. And we'd sit so close, touching sometimes, passing platters back and forth, everyone yakking at once, pausing to join in a ragged chorus of happy birthday, drifting over from a nearby table. And finally, as our ravaged plates made their way back to the kitchen, sometimes we'd pose for a picture taken on someone's phone by an indulgent server. Arms wrapped around each other, grinning like kids at graduation. Now, those of us who live alone search cookbooks and computers for the dishes we make for one. Post pictures of our creations online, not to brag, but to share communion, the only way we can. Well, now I guess we're crawling out of a long, dark tunnel, but when I wrote that poem last spring, we were just crawling into it. So I've been doing some writing over the last year to sort of look at that question of connection in various ways, and how we missed connection and how we strove for it during the last year.
Tonight, I'm cooking. Because I miss the creation my hands can make. Too often I focus on my knuckles, but tonight, I'd rather use the precision of my fingers to cut a plantain. Place them in a pan and wash them tan in oil. Like if I never moved from Puerto Rico, would my skin be tostones brown? How I cook to feel closer to home. How this has nothing to do with who can cook better and everything to do with the man on the train that yelled, "English, please!" when I was just giving directions to someone in Spanish. How we tried to claim space for his ignorance by diminishing my culture. How there is no correct way to be Latino in public after being told to shut up without proving that person right. So tonight, y'all, I need to cook. I need to take something dead, massage it in adobo, let it get loose to the song of oil and sweat and watch it give life to those that eat it. Tonight, we will eat. Tonight, we will praise over our food and not worry about the language we do it in. Tonight, the stereotype of being Latino and loud does not exist here. We are all too busy reteaching our mouths how to be a host for this food, how to leave room for dessert, because there is always dessert in my house, and they all have names that don't have names in English, because when you taste this good, there is no need for translation. There is no English, please, for flavor, for tradition that keeps culture alive. Because we all have to eat, because we all have to live. Because what's the point of doing either without a little sazon, like the next person that yells, English, please, when I'm just giving directions to someone in Spanish, must be bitter. Like, they must be what they eat. Like, tonight, I will be an island. It actually happened. I was living my life doing, mask-free 2003 type of situation. You know what I mean? I don't know. It was later than that. But I was just going home, and I overheard someone asking for being on the train, not knowing where they were going, and I started to talk to them because I've been on the train multiple times, talking in Spanish, letting them know where to go, and of course there was someone. I guess they forgot that more than one language existed in this world, and that being in Boston, there's a high chance we're gonna hear more than one language. And yelled out, English, please. It happened. The stop came. They left, and I was on the stop for like one more, and I felt like paused. I'm like, if I stay quiet, he wins. If I say anything out loud and like try to confront him, he also wins because I fall into a stereotype. And I just didn't know what to do. And so that night I went home and I decided to cook. And cooking was something that I had just started to do. I was a cereal guy. Like you wanted to, I'm cereals and wheat thins all day, But I recently started to cook, and specifically started to try to cook food for my culture. And something about needing to make something that was from home, that I could feel loud and alive and proud without any type of without shame coming in, with no shame as a seasoning. I didn't want that.
I want my poems to not take very long. I really have a desperate desire for them to not take very long, but they do take several years actually to crystallize. Usually what happens is I have some kind of inspiration and I just have a notebook, and it's usually a stone paper notebook. So if anyone out there has never tried stone paper, you should. It just creates a nice smooth surface for writing. And I just get a big pen and I start writing my ideas down, a sort of free write. And then I'll, after a few days, add to it, make sure I have all my content out, all the things I wanted to say. And then I'll take that writing from the notebook and I'll put it on a computer. I'll just type it in. And sometimes I'll have an idea of where line breaks are. Sometimes I won't. I'll put little question marks in as I'm typing it out. And then after that, I lineate the poem, and then it's a draft. And then all that is pretty quick. That's usually over a few days, maybe in one day. But then the revision process starts. I show my poems to other people. The short answer is several years.
I like all types of poems, really, as long as they're good poems. I guess I'm especially drawn to lyric poetry. I'm especially drawn to poems that are musical, that employ sonic devices. I like form poems. I don't write that many of them, but I admire them. I guess I feel most close to poems like those of Mark Doty that begin with describing something and that keep exploring that object or that item or that image until that image yields something deeper that leads to some kind of discovery and insight that the poet would not have realized had he or she not sat down to write that poem. Poems that go to different places, that take associative leaps. I think that's really something that's happening in poetry, and that's opening up so many possibilities that use juxtaposition so that you're really surprised by the way two ideas or two images are put together without explanation.
I was just exposed to it from my teachers, and they were very open about it. They just showed me some videos, and they made it really accessible, and I was just hooked. And I just really liked the art form, and I felt it was giving me a voice, and the entry into that space was really straightforward for me, and it felt like the space wanted me there. And I'm thankful that that experience wasn't too far into the past, because I use that in my classroom now. Because when I'm worried about like, oh, are they gonna like this? Are they not? It's just about presenting it in a way that's accessible, that relates to them, and then just kind of take it from there and not overthink it.
Well, I can't remember the title. I can remember that it was 2 stanzas. I was 14. And I kept a diary and journal, but this was the first time I actually composed a poem. My first love had died about some months earlier. So this is what made me want to write this poem. It was this way of not having it just be the grieving in the journal, but to actually try to put some kind of a container around it. And the poem was the first container for that. I don't have the poem anymore, but I absolutely remember showing it to someone.
I'm a storyteller. I'm an observer, and so a lot of my poems are about something I've seen or experienced. In a way, if I were a painter, some of my poems would be miniatures, because I look at very small, seemingly small moments, and try to mine them for something that maybe isn't necessarily so small when we step back and think about it.
What do I love about poetry? The thing that I love about poetry is that whether or not someone calls something poetry, we don't need someone to call something poetry in order for poetry to be happening, right? Like my daughter learning to laugh for the first time is poetry. Like our puppy seeing snow and like bugging out for the first time is poetry. If I decide to then take that moment and put it on page and turn it into a poem, right? Then that's when everyone else can say it's poetry. But I don't need to be a poet to appreciate poetry. You don't need to be a poet to appreciate poetry. You don't need to even write poetry to enjoy poetry. And I think that poetry highlights what needs to be honored in the moment. Showing love is an action, and poetry to me is the act of showing love and or allowing love to be highlighted.